The sound of a Lamborghini screeching to a halt outside Manhattan General Hospital turned heads as Reynolds jumped out, tossing his keys to the valet with barely a glance. His best friend and business partner had been in an accident, and nothing, not even the board meeting he'd abandoned mid-sentence, mattered more right now. Reed's custom Italian loafers clicked rapidly across the polished hospital floor as he strode toward the information desk, his tailored suit and commanding presence causing people to step aside instinctively. "I'm here for James Wilson. Car accident." "Admitted this morning," Reed said, not bothering with pleasantries. His voice was steady but tense, betraying the worry he tried to conceal. The receptionist looked up, momentarily stunned by the intensity in his steel blue eyes. "Mr. Wilson is in the trauma unit, 5th floor. Only family is permitted at this. He has no family." "I'm listed as his emergency contact," Reed cut in, already heading toward the elevators. At 32, Reed had built Reynolds Technologies from a dorm room startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and he was accustomed to doors opening for him. Hospital regulations were just another obstacle to overcome. The elevator seemed to crawl between floors. Reed checked his watch, a rare Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's yearly salary, and tapped his foot impatiently. When the doors finally opened on the 5th floor, he strode directly to the nurse's station. "James Wilson, where is he?" Reed demanded, his voice drawing the attention of a nurse who was reviewing charts at the counter. "Sir, you need to check in with," began an older nurse with a stern expression. "I'm Paige Brenner, Mr. Wilson's primary care nurse," interrupted a softer voice. Reed turned to find a woman in blue scrubs approaching. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the chaos of the trauma unit, her hazel eyes held a calm steadiness that momentarily caught Reed off guard. "How is he?" Reed asked, his tone softening just slightly. Paige assessed the man before her, clearly wealthy, definitely used to getting his way, but the worry in his eyes was genuine. "Mr. Wilson is stable. He has a concussion, 4 broken ribs, and a fractured femur that required surgery. Are you family?" Reed Reynolds. "I'm his emergency contact and closest thing to family he has," Reed replied, extending his hand out of habit. When she took it, he noted her firm grip and the complete absence of the star-struck reaction he typically received when people recognized his name. "Follow me, Mr. Reynolds," she said, releasing his hand and turning toward the hallway. "He's heavily sedated right now, but you can sit with him. Just don't expect much response." Reed followed her down the corridor, noticing how she greeted patients and staff alike with the same warm smile. It was a stark contrast to the calculated interactions of his corporate world. James lay still in the hospital bed, his athletic frame looking unusually vulnerable, surrounded by medical equipment. Reed felt his stomach tighten. They had been friends since freshman year at MIT, building their first company together before Reed bought him out to pursue Reynolds Technologies on his own. Despite their different paths, James had remained his most trusted confidant. "The next 48 hours are critical," Paige explained, checking James's vitals with practiced efficiency. "But he's young and healthy. That works in his favor." "He needs the best care possible," Reed said, pulling out his phone. "I can arrange for specialists from Johns Hopkins or Mayo Clinic to Mr. Reynolds," Paige interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "I understand your concern, but Manhattan General has one of the top trauma units in the country. Dr. Sharma, who performed his surgery, is internationally recognized. More specialists and opinions might actually slow his recovery." Reed wasn't used to being contradicted, but something in her direct gaze made him pause. "You're sure he's getting everything he needs?" "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "And what he needs right now is rest and stability, not a parade of new doctors." Reed found himself nodding, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "How long until he wakes up? We're keeping him sedated until tomorrow to give his body time to start healing." "You should go home, get some rest yourself, and come back in the morning." "I'm staying," Reed said, removing his suit jacket and draping it over the visitor's chair, Paige looked like she wanted to argue but simply nodded. "I'll bring you a blanket and some water." "The chair reclines, though I can't promise it's comfortable." Before Reed could respond, his phone rang. "Reynolds," he answered sharply. "No, I don't care about the Singapore deal right now. Tell them to wait. Yes, indefinitely." He ended the call and found Paige observing him with a curious expression. "You must be important," she remarked, adjusting James's Roman 4. "I'm just busy," Reed replied, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Everyone's busy, Mr. Reynolds." "Not everyone can drop everything and camp out in a hospital room," she said with a hint of a smile that somehow wasn't judgmental. Reed didn't know how to respond to that. In his world, people either wanted something from him or were intimidated by him. This nurse seemed to be neither. "I'll be back to check on Mr. Wilson in an hour," Paige said, moving toward the door. "The call button is there if you need anything." Over the next 12 hours, Reed maintained his vigil by James's bedside, working remotely on his laptop and taking calls in the hallway. Each time Paige came to check on James, Reed found himself watching her work the gentle way she adjusted pillows, her soothing voice as she spoke to her unconscious patient, her meticulous attention to every monitor and measurement. Around 3 a.m., when the hospital had grown quiet, Paige brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. "Hospital coffee is terrible, but it's hot," she said, setting it beside him. "Thank you," Reed replied, genuinely surprised by the gesture. "Don't you ever sleep? I'm on a double shift." "Budget cuts mean we're understaffed," she explained with a slight shrug. "I go off duty at 7, Reed frowned. "Is that safe for the patients, I mean? It's not ideal," she admitted, "but we make it work. We always do." As she turned to leave, Reed found himself asking, "Why nursing? You seem smart enough to do anything." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. That came out wrong. To his surprise, Paige laughed a genuine, melodic sound that seemed out of place in the sterile hospital room. "It did, but I'll answer anyway. I became a nurse because it's the most direct way I could think of to make a difference every day. Not everyone measures success by the size of their bank account, Mr. Reynolds." Reed felt the subtle rebuke, but wasn't offended. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him with such honesty. "Reed," he corrected. "Please call me Reed." "All right, Reed," she said, his name sounding different in her gentle voice. "Try to get some sleep. Even billionaires need rest." The next morning, James began to stir as the sedation wore off. Reed was immediately at his side, relief washing over him as his friend's eyes fluttered open. "What happened?" James croaked, his voice raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. "You decided to test if your Porsche could take a concrete barrier at 60 miles an hour, Reed replied, masking his concern with their usual banter. "Spoiler alert, it can't." James attempted a weak smile that turned into a grimace of pain. "Don't try to move," Paige instructed, entering the room with perfect timing. She administered pain medication into his Roman 4 line and checked his vitals. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson. You gave us quite a scare. Did I die?" "Because you look like an angel," James mumbled, the medication already taking effect. Paige rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Original. I've never heard that one before," she replied with a smile that made Reed feel an unexpected pang of something he couldn't quite identify. "He's always been terrible with women," Reed said, trying to cover the strange moment. "And yet I'm the one with a social life," James retorted weakly before drifting back to sleep. Over the next few days, Reed established a routine. He would arrive at the hospital early, work remotely from James's room, and leave late in the evening. He rescheduled meetings, delegated projects, and even postponed a trip to Tokyo, all decisions that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Each day, he found himself looking forward to Paige's shifts. She worked 4 12-hour days and then had 3 days off. Reed found himself memorizing her schedule, timing his coffee breaks to coincide with hers when possible. On the 5th day, James was strong enough to notice the pattern. "You're into her," he stated bluntly when Reed returned to the room after coincidentally running into Paige in the cafeteria. "Who?" Reed asked, feigning ignorance as he reopened his laptop. "Don't play dumb, it doesn't suit you," James said with a knowing smirk. Nurse Paige. The one you keep finding excuses to talk to. I'm being friendly to the woman keeping you alive, Reed countered, but he could feel a warmth creeping up his neck. Right. Because friendly is a word everyone associates with Reed Reynolds, the man Forbes called the Ice King of Tech. James laughed, then winced at the pain in his ribs. Just admit it, you like her, she's different, Reed conceded, unable to articulate exactly what drew him to Paige. It wasn't just her obvious beauty, though he couldn't deny his attraction to her. It was something more fundamental. The way she carried herself with quiet confidence, her unflinching honesty, and the genuine care she showed to everyone around her. Different is good, James said more seriously. You need more different in your life, Reed. All you do is work. Building a company takes sacrifice. Yeah, but what's the point of all that success if you're not living? James challenged. When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Reed didn't have an answer for that. That evening, when Paige finished her shift, Reed found himself following her to the elevator. Can I buy you a coffee? He asked, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. Not hospital coffee, real coffee. There's a place across the street. Paige looked surprised, then hesitant. I don't think that's a good idea. It's just coffee, Reed insisted, then added more softly, please. I could use a break from hospital walls, and I bet you could too. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. All right, just coffee. The cafe was small and cozy, nothing like the upscale establishments Reed typically frequented. They found a quiet corner table, and for the first time since they'd met, conversation flowed without the backdrop of medical equipment or interruptions from hospital staff. Reed learned that Paige had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a factory worker and a school teacher. She'd worked her way through nursing school, turning down an opportunity at a private practice to work in trauma care where she felt most needed. What about you? She asked after sharing stories about particularly memorable patients. How does someone become a billionaire before 35? Reed found himself telling her about his childhood fascination with computers, the app he'd developed in college that caught the attention of Silicon Valley investors, and the risks he'd taken that had paid off beyond his wildest expectations. But you don't seem particularly happy about it, Paige observed, studying him over the rim of her coffee cup. The comment caught Reed off guard. I'm proud of what I've built, he said defensively. That's not the same thing as being happy, she replied simply. Their coffee stretched into dinner at Paige's suggestion, a hole-in-the-wall Thai place that Reed would have walked past without a second glance, but that served the best pad Thai he'd ever tasted. By the time he walked her to her subway stop, 3 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Thank you, he said as they paused at the station entrance. This was nice, Paige smiled, and Reed felt that now familiar flutter in his chest. It was, she agreed. But Reed, I should be clear about something. I don't date patients' friends or relatives. It's a personal rule. It gets too complicated, Reed nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. I understand professional boundaries. It's not just that, she continued. We come from different worlds. You're, well, you, and I'm just a nurse with student loans and a tiny apartment in Queens. You're not just anything, Paige, Reed said quietly, surprising himself with the intensity of his conviction. Their eyes held for a moment before Paige broke the connection, glancing at her watch. I should go, early shift tomorrow. Can we do this again? Reed asked. As friends, he added quickly, respecting your professional boundaries. Paige hesitated, then nodded. As friends. Over the next 2 weeks, as James's condition improved steadily, Reed and Paige fell into a new routine. They would meet for coffee or a quick meal after her shifts, always careful to maintain the pretense of friendship, despite the growing attraction neither could fully deny. Reed found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his fears about the direction of his company, his complicated relationship with his parents, the loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed him despite being surrounded by people. Paige listened without judgment, offering insights that often surprised him with their perception. In turn, she told him about her dreams of eventually opening a clinic in an underserved neighborhood, her close relationship with her younger sister, and her love of photography, a hobby she rarely had time for anymore. "You should make time," Reed said one evening as they walked through Central Park. The early spring air was crisp and the park was relatively quiet. "Life's too short to put your passions on hold indefinitely," Paige laughed softly. "Says the workaholic who sleeps 4 hours a night." "Do as I say, not as I do," Reed replied with a grin. Then, more seriously, "I'm starting to think I've been getting it wrong all these years." "Getting what wrong?" "The balance, or lack thereof," he admitted. "Meeting you has made me realize how narrow my life has become." Paige stopped walking, turning to face him. "Reed, I know, professional boundaries," he said quickly, "but those boundaries have an expiration date. James is being discharged next week." "And then what?" Paige asked, a mixture of hope and uncertainty in her eyes. "And then I'd like to take you on a proper date," Reed said, taking a chance and reaching for her hand. "No more pretending we're just friends." Paige didn't pull away, her fingers warm against his. "It wouldn't be simple. Your life is complicated." "I'm good at solving complicated problems," Reed said, stepping closer. "It's kind of my specialty." A smile tugged at her lips. "I've heard. There was a whole profile about you in Time magazine." "You read that?" "Maybe," she admitted with a blush that Reed found endearing. "I might have done some research after our first coffee." "And yet you still agreed to a second one. I must not have seemed too terrible." "You're not terrible at all," Paige said softly. "That's the problem." The week passed in a blur of anticipation. James teased Reed mercilessly about his nurse crush, but seemed genuinely happy to see his friend invested in something other than work for once. When discharge day finally arrived, Reed felt an odd mixture of emotions: relief for James's recovery, excitement about pursuing Paige properly, and a strange nostalgia for the hospital that had become a second home. "Take care of yourself," Paige instructed James as she reviewed his discharge papers, "and follow up with the physical therapist as scheduled." "Yes, madam," James replied with a mock salute. "I'll be good, I promise." "I'll make sure of it," Reed assured her. Then, more quietly, as James chatted with the orderly, "Are we still on for tonight?" Paige nodded, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. 8 o'clock, don't be late." Reed had made reservations at Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, but at the last minute changed his mind. Instead, he took Paige to a small jazz club in Harlem that James had recommended, a place where the music was authentic, the crowd diverse, and the atmosphere intimate without being pretentious. It was the right choice. Paige's face lit up as they entered, and the evening flowed with an ease that surprised them both. They talked, laughed, and eventually danced, Reed discovering that, despite years of avoiding dance floors, he didn't mind them so much with the right partner. "You're full of surprises," Paige said as they swayed to a slow number, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. "Good ones, I hope," Reed murmured into her hair, breathing in the light floral scent of her shampoo. "Mostly," she confirmed with a soft laugh. "Though I'm still getting used to the way people stare when they recognize you." Reed had noticed it too: the sideways glances, the whispered conversations, and inevitably the surreptitious photos taken with phones. "I'm sorry about that. It comes with the territory, unfortunately." "Does it bother you?" she asked, pulling back slightly to see his face. Reed considered the question. "It used to, now I mostly ignore it, but I hate that it affects you." "I'm tougher than I look," Paige assured him. "It takes more than a few curious stares to scare me off." Their first kiss came later that night, outside her apartment building in Queens. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "But I want to see you tomorrow." "I'm working a 12-hour shift," Paige reminded him. "Dinner after, I'll wait." Paige smiled, touching his face gently. "You really aren't what I expected, Reed Reynolds." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." The weeks that followed were a revelation for Reed. He began adjusting his schedule to accommodate time with Paige, delegating tasks he would once have insisted on handling personally. and even turning his phone off for hours at a time, a change that shocked his executive team more than any corporate restructuring could have. For Paige, the adjustment to dating one of New York's most eligible bachelors came with its own challenges. There were articles speculating about their relationship, paparazzi occasionally following them, and the inevitable questions from coworkers who had seen their photos in gossip columns. But there were wonderful moments, 2 quiet evenings cooking together in Reed's penthouse, weekend trips to a cabin he owned in the Catskills, and long conversations that lasted well into the night. Reed introduced Paige to his world of tech innovations and corporate philanthropy, while she brought him into her circle of friends, nurses, teachers, and social workers, who initially regarded him with suspicion, but gradually accepted him as more than just Paige's billionaire boyfriend. 3 months into their relationship, they faced their first serious challenge when Reed needed to travel to Hong Kong for a critical negotiation that would potentially double his company's market share in Asia. "It's 2 weeks," Reed explained as they discussed the trip over dinner at his place. "I can't delegate this one, Paige. Too much is riding on it." "I understand," she said, though her expression was troubled. "It's your job. I've never expected you to change who you are for me." "But," Reed prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but I worry about where this is going," she admitted. "When things calm down with this deal, there will be another one, and another after that. Your world doesn't stop moving." Reed set down his fork, reaching across the table for her hand. "Come with me." "What?" "To Hong Kong. Take some vacation time. We'll make it part business, part pleasure." Paige shook her head. "I can't just take 2 weeks off with no notice. The hospital is already understaffed and I have patients depending on me." Reed felt a flash of frustration. In his world, problems like this were solved with money and influence. "I could talk to the hospital administrator, make a donation that would—" "No," Paige cut him off firmly. "That's not how my world works, Reed. I don't want special treatment because of who I'm dating." The tension between them escalated into their first real argument, exposing the fundamental differences in their lives that they'd been carefully navigating around. Reed, accustomed to bending the world to his will, couldn't understand why Paige wouldn't let him solve this problem. Paige, fiercely independent and principled, refused to compromise her professional integrity. They parted that night without resolving anything, both hurt and uncertain about the future. The next day, Reed arrived at the hospital unannounced, finding Paige during her lunch break in the cafeteria. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised to see him in his full business attire, a stark contrast to the casual clothes he typically wore when visiting her at work. "I was wrong," Reed said without preamble, sitting across from her. "I should have respected your boundaries instead of trying to bulldoze through them." Paige's expression softened slightly. "And I probably overreacted. I'm just scared." "Of what?" "Of falling too deeply into us, and then discovering we can't make it work because our lives are too different," she confessed. Reed reached across the table, taking her hand. "I don't have all the answers, Paige, but I know that what we have is worth fighting for." "I've never felt this way about anyone before." "Neither have I," she admitted quietly. "So let's figure it out together," Reed suggested. "I'll go to Hong Kong because I have to, but I'll come back as soon as possible, and while I'm gone, we'll talk every day, no matter what time it is." "And when you get back?" Paige asked. "When I get back, we'll have a serious conversation about our future, all options on the table." The 2 weeks of separation proved challenging but ultimately strengthened their relationship. Reed called Paige daily, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night in Hong Kong to catch her before her shift. They shared details about their days, their frustrations, and their growing certainty that what they had found was worth any adjustment it might require. When Reed returned, he came directly from the airport to the hospital, waiting patiently until Paige finished her shift. As she emerged from the building, tired but smiling at the sight of him, Reed knew with absolute clarity what he wanted. "I missed you," Paige said, stepping into his embrace. "I missed you more," Reed replied, kissing her deeply. When they separated, he took her hand and led her to a nearby bench. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while I was away." "That sounds serious," Paige said, her expression turning cautious. It is, Reed acknowledged. I've realized something important. For years, I've been building a company, accumulating wealth and chasing success, but I've never been building a life. Not a real one, Reed. Let me finish, he said gently. Meeting you changed everything for me, Paige. You showed me what really matters: connection, compassion, making a difference in ways that can't be measured in dollars or stock options. I'm nothing special, Paige protested softly. You're everything special, Reed contradicted her, and I want to build a life with you. I know it won't always be easy. Our worlds are different and there will be compromises on both sides, but I love you, Paige Brenner. I love your strength, your kindness, and your unflinching integrity. Tears welled in Paige's eyes. I love you too, but Reed, I can't give up nursing. It's not just a job to me. I would never ask you to, Reed assured her. In fact, I have a proposition. The Reynolds Foundation has been looking to fund a mobile health initiative for underserved communities. It needs someone with clinical experience and a passion for accessible healthcare to lead it. Paige's eyes widened. Are you creating a job for me? No, Reed said firmly. I'm telling you about an existing initiative that happens to align perfectly with your skills and passions. Whether you're interested in it or not, the foundation will proceed with the project, but I think you'd be extraordinary in that role if it appeals to you. That's actually incredible, Paige admitted, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. You don't have to decide anything now, Reed assured her. Take time to think about it, research the foundation, talk to the current directors, make sure it's something you truly want. And if it's not, then we'll figure something else out, Reed said simply. I'm committed to finding a way forward for us, Paige, whatever that looks like. Over the following months, their relationship deepened as they worked through the practical challenges of blending their lives. Paige did eventually join the Reynolds Foundation, but only after thoroughly vetting the organization and insisting on reporting to the board rather than directly to Reed, a boundary he respected and admired. Reed, meanwhile, reorganized his company structure to allow for a more sustainable work-life balance, appointing a COO who could handle day-to-day operations while he focused on strategic vision. He still worked hard and traveled when necessary, but no longer at the expense of his personal life. 1 year after their first coffee together, Reed took Paige back to the hospital cafeteria where it all began. As they sat at their table, reminiscing about those early days, Reed reached into his pocket. This isn't exactly the romantic setting I had planned, he admitted with a nervous laugh. What are you talking about? Paige asked, then froze as Reed pulled out a small velvet box. This exact table is where I first realized I was falling in love with you, Reed said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. It seems fitting that it's also where I ask you to spend your life with me. He opened the box to reveal a stunning but tasteful diamond ring. Paige Brenner, this year with you has been the most meaningful of my life. You've shown me what it means to live with purpose, to care deeply, and to build something that lasts. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Paige's cheeks as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak at first. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, I'll marry you. As Reed slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted around them. Hospital staff, many of whom had watched their relationship unfold from the beginning, had gathered to witness the moment. I might have told a few people, Reed confessed with a grin. A few. Paige laughed through her tears, looking around at the crowd of well-wishers. I wanted to share this moment with the people who matter to you, Reed explained, just like I want to share every moment of my life with you. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony that balanced Reed's resources with Paige's preferences for simplicity and meaning. They honeymooned in Italy, where Reed surprised Paige with photography classes from renowned professionals fulfilling her long-neglected passion. Upon their return, they moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn rather than Reed's Manhattan penthouse, a compromise that gave them a true home rather than just an impressive address. They established the Reynolds Clinic in Queens, combining Reed's business acumen with Paige's healthcare expertise to create a model facility that provided top-quality care regardless of patients' ability to pay. 2 years into their marriage, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, who inherited their father's piercing blue eyes and their mother's compassionate spirit. Reed, once known for his relentless work ethic, became equally renowned for his devotion to his family, often bringing the children to the office or rescheduling international calls around bedtime stories. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on the rooftop garden of their home watching the sunset over the Brooklyn skyline, Reed pulled Paige close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying the demanding billionaire who interrupted your shift that day?" Paige smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Not for a second, though I still maintain you were insufferable when we first met." "I was worried," Reed defended himself with a laugh. "You were arrogant," Paige corrected, "but you had a good heart underneath all that swagger." "Lucky for me you saw it," Reed said, kissing her softly. "Lucky for both of us," Paige replied. "Who would have thought that a hospital visit would change everything?" As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, they remained wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them together, a path that began with a crisis, but led to a love neither had been looking for, but both had desperately needed.